Before we start, I'd like to recommend you the channel of Zephyr Wings. Just like me, they are doing Rusty Lake theories, and doing it quite seriously. I would like us to support them, the link is in the description.
Welcome all alive to my nest. Here's Now Here. And today, we'll continue our dive into Rusty Lake. Last time, wading knee-deep into Detective Dale Vandermeer's story in Part 2a, we, in details yet without speculating, went through the plot of two Theory-Scape games, Case 23 and The Mill, which happens in its background. And today, we'll finally move into the realm of theories and analyze Case 23. What its events might mean, and how they connect to the possible scenarios about deceased Laura Vandermeer that we outlined back in Part 1 of this series. As different as these scenarios may be, all they have one thing in common. Laura, a young woman in a cube pattern dress, suffered from depression, because of which she went to a mental health resort at Rusty Lake, where she experienced strange, at times even terrifying events. Unfortunately, the trip did little to help her depression, if not worsened it. 2 years later, Laura mysteriously died, and no one knew whether it was murder or suicide. Our new protagonist was assigned to investigate this strange case, Detective Dale Vandermeer. And from here on, the series plot will revolve mostly around him. With that said, let's sink a little deeper into the level of small speculations. Rusty Lake games are widely known for their surreal, somewhat abstract style, taking things too literally, without gameplay contrivances, without symbols, or an unreliable narrator is hard, and in my book, strongly discouraged. However, if Case 23 has taught me anything, it's that sometimes in this series the nonsense really does happen. Here specifically, that becomes clear from many objects at the murder scene, and even some beyond it. For example, we know for sure that Laura's trip to the lake actually happened, because we see the contest in the newspaper. Furthermore, we now know that it was arranged by mysterious Mr. Crow and Mr. Owl, just like Case 23 itself. Well, mostly. Next, we can confirm that Laura brought her parrot Harvey with her, because we find there his familiar box. Even the matches are still inside. And the jar of flies, among which we sometimes find fireflies, indicates that Harvey really could have driven away a corrupted soul with their help. We can go further. We see the room from Seasons, which means it's real too. Some fans speculate it's not, because it vanishes right before our eyes. They say it's some kind of illusion or, for Christ's sake, a distorted memory of Dale's. The same way Seasons are for Laura. Here's the thing. Case 23 is the first game where there's simply no doubt about its reality. And if Dale saw another room, then he truly saw it. More than that, it most certainly was there. Because whatever magic might make it appear out of nothing, Mr. Owl has no use for that. But making it disappear along with evidence, oh, that's right up his alley. And the cactus. As I said before, Seasons are Laura's memories. Yes, she died. Yes, Dale investigated her death. But at some point, Laura's ghost went back in time, or at least back in her memories, to try preventing that death. One of the actions that was seemingly supposed to lead to this? Digging up a flower and planting a cactus in its place. So yeah, in Case 23, it's the same cactus, in the same pot, even at the same stage of growth as in the altered memory of that fall. So it's entirely possible that it's the very same cactus moved to another room, since in Case 23 there's no cactus nor flower, and that changes in Laura's memories somehow affected reality itself. But that only works if you take Seasons literally. And here, well, you see the problem. And finally, the nesting doll. You are not supposed to take it completely literally. A fish, Harvey, and a corrupted soul aren't exactly common images. But what's interesting, one of the dolls depicts a blonde woman slitting her own throat. Since the very seasons, Laura's death has been shrouded in mystery, and the main question, as the news put it, is murder or suicide. The murder weapon could have shed some light on all of this. But here's the catch. Either Laura's soul took it, or it's still lying in the room that's no longer accessible. As for the question, over the course of the entire series, the developers have dropped many more contradictory hints. A handful of them could be interpreted in different ways. We will examine them gradually as they appear, and in the end, perhaps, we might finally reach a definitive answer. For now, though, we have a soul that kills Laura on the moon in Seasons, and a suicide nesting doll. Some theories say that the corrupted soul symbolizes Laura's depression, which she really did struggle with. Others argue that it is Laura herself, which in a way isn't entirely wrong either. But here's another conflicted hint from the developers, a photograph of the victim's house, which also features a corrupted soul, alongside the victim. Well, on the actual photo, they're barely visible, but you can see them clearly on the chapter cover, which uses the same image. Because of this, some theorists hesitate to take it literally, though I don't really see why. If you look closely, it's not some random abstract image of the house. It's literally the stage of action illuminated by pulsing police lights that we'll later see outside the house. And since Laura had no way of being there, it's the cover that reuses the image of the photo, not the other way around. So the photo is certainly evidence, and how you interpret it is another matter entirely. It could very well be that a corrupted soul literally killed Laura, and then Laura became corrupted herself. Or maybe it's corrupted Laura traveling through time, which is why she appears in the same photo with her past still living self. After all, in Seasons, we see both Laura and a corrupted soul from an outside perspective. One of the key events of the first chapter of the case is Dale's call to Rusty Lake, and his further conversation with who we learn later was Mr. Crow. He wouldn't accept anything but answers straight from the newspaper. And when Dale finally gave the right word, all he got in return was, "Your place is already taken." I believe that the place was taken by Laura. And that's why I think she went to the lake 2 years earlier. Exactly by winning that very contest. Right after the call, Laura's body rose into the air and disappeared, leaving behind a swarm of black moths, most likely symbolizing death. We already know that Mr. Owl teleported the body, so I think the moth gathering on the ceiling to form the combination for the safe with crucial evidence, that was his hint for Dale. Or maybe it was just gameplay and Dale found the photo some other way. In the second chapter, which takes place almost a year after the first one, that I've similarly forgotten the dates, please fix it. Dale locked himself inside his office, together with all the information on the lake he's managed to gather. And he locked himself in substantially. There isn't a single door in the room. Jokes aside, some players actually take this literally. They say if there's no door, then again Seasons must not be real. And here I am, thinking that Case 23 proves the opposite. Because, once again, there's no reason for it to be a memory or an illusion. It's a story of an ordinary man into whose, as ordinary life, some incomprehensible crap is leaking through. Besides, there are memory games where doors do exist. For instance, Arrow or Birthday. In one of the articles on the official website, the developers shared their philosophy on game design. 2 rules are followed. The player must be able to use all the items in the room, and you must not give the player too many options. I think that's the major reason why in some games there are no doors, regardless of how real the events are meant to be. Sometimes they are just unnecessary, because they never open and lead nowhere. By the way, the fact that Dark Bob most likely escapes while leaving the cube behind could mean that in Cube-Escape the Lake/Harvey's box, the soul does the same, leave the cube instead of tearing into it. And here's another suspect in Laura's death. Not Bob himself, who was deeply depressed over her passing, but his corrupted soul he turned into. But honestly, I never really believed he was guilty. And even his soul would have to go to extreme lengths to commit that murder. And I think Dale agrees. I have a feeling that he never really suspected him either. He made it crystal clear that he was truly interested in the lake. And what interests me, how on earth did Laura, suddenly alive, appear on TV and carry out an exchange along the way? Look here, a hand of flesh and blood. I'm not sure if we should take literally the young crow that was shaven off with Dale's beard and digested by a cat into an egg. But Laura and her white cube, I want to. At least by analogy with the black cube, which even has confirmation. But as much as I want a rational explanation, I don't have one. Feel free to write yours in the comments. Meanwhile, Dale takes both cubes and wakes up in the chapel by Rusty Lake. There's not much to say about it yet. Lots of strange items, very little context. Well, just a few small things. I can tell you that the statue's third eye inspired my interpretation of wisdom for the pentacle in the lake. And remember how I asked you to keep in mind the skull, the fetus and the heart? Carry on remembering them, they aren't showing up anytime soon. Or you can watch this video with a timecode if you know who Islanders and Vanderbooms are. Probably the only thing we can talk about right now, the history of Rusty Lake. Painting, that is. The Shepherd's Admiration, the Massacre of Innocents, and Salome. They all depict biblical motifs, only now with cubes. This gives me an idea that in the Rusty Lake universe, Jesus was really born and King Herod really tried to kill him through the infant genocide. And somehow, the cubes were involved in all of that. Or at the very least, there exists a branch of Christianity that believes it. The only inconsistency here, the woman with the platter is not Salome, but the Lady of the Lake, a brand new character. Therefore, objectively, the other paintings could be depicting entirely different events as well. Personally, I don't think so, because the devs haven't given us any new meanings for them. And they are unlikely to. Come on, it's been 10 years. Next, I want to move my focus to Mr. Crow. This really isn't the first time we encounter him. Previously he briefly appeared in Harvey's box, but I don't think that's supposed to be taken literally. There he did nothing. He was simply a shock factor, a puzzle, and a reference to Marguerite. And now, in case 23, he takes us by boat to the familiar cabin where we fished as Laura. And it turns out, it's not nearly that abandoned after all. For inside its walls, somehow, they managed to hide an elevator. And while we're trying to get it running, we are bothered by a deer, then a headless deer, and then an anthropomorphic, corrupted deer. Now this really feels like Cube-Escape the lake. Only this time, it didn't just summon darkness. It ended up flashier. Most likely, it first arrived looking like a deer, and then made the walls reveal terrifying patterns. In the old version, it even chased us around the cabin, teleporting and breaking the laws of physics. The devs, please bring that back! And if we fail to escape on the elevator in time, it most likely kills us. But interestingly, the lake gives us another opportunity. The way Dale acknowledges this makes me think that the lake is indeed capable of controlling time. And the deeper we dive into the series, the more of these suspicions we'll encounter. Well, take the ending for instance. Once Dale immerses himself in the lake, he stops feeling his body. And, more importantly, feeling time. Experiencing both the present and the past. Although here you could blame it on the memory cubes. And the last thing. Beside the cubes, we see stars in the lake. The same stars were seen when Laura traveled across such cubes in Seasons. The same stars were seen in Dale's office when he was teleported there. The same stars were superimposed over the reflection in the lake in the cover of Theory-Scape collection. So yeah, they are somehow connected to the lake.
Before we continue, if you like what I'm doing, leave thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. It really helps. And now back to the video.
I suppose that's all for speculation so far. We can go deeper. Usually, this is where I talk about various theories covering the whole game. But for better or for worse, Case 23 is pretty straightforward. Dale finds Laura's body. Spends about a year investigating it. Dear devs bring back the dates to the collection. He gets teleported to the chapel by the lake. And then taken by boat to the cabin. Then he escapes on the elevator into the lake itself. Okay, he might die a couple of times, but the lake rewinds all that every time. Notice the little squares with green watering clocks. That's how I depict the lake changing the timeline in my diagrams. Here's the moment when the time shift begins, and here we see its end. And consequently, the start of the changes depicted on a separate timeline. For the most part, Case 23 doesn't leave much room for other interpretations. On the contrary, it's a small island of stability the theories of the other games swirl around. So let's dive in on the level of the bigger picture. And here's one of those theories based on Case 23, the second chance theory for Theory-Scape the lake. 3 years before Dale ever reached the cabin, and possibly died a couple of times, Laura herself could have died there by a Dark Soul's hand, and received a unique chance to change her fate. And the lake, granting a second chance by analogy with Case 23, could have been that very opportunity. However, that still doesn't rule out the alternative explanations of that shift. Case 23 simply sets a precedent, just like Seasons set a precedent for other theories. Either way, the lake, well, and Harvey's box too, don't contradict the case in any of their versions. But at the same time, they rely on Seasons, and that's where things get interesting. For them, I have outlined 4 theories, many of which start the same way. A ghost of Laura who suffered from depression after the real events shown in the little squares enters a memory cube and lives through them again. And since they are inside the cube, the frames of these remembered events now appear as little cubes too. In the game we see specifically them, not the original events. Only for some reason, at this stage, Laura is unable to change anything, and the events repeat precisely. But eventually, Laura finds the blue cube, which rewinds time inside the memories, sending her back to the beginning. And here, she starts methodically changing those events in order to gather fuel for the magical machine in the future. And what said machine actually did, the versions diverge. Theory 1. Presumably, by changing her painful memories and overcoming her depression, Laura's ghost finds appeasement. Some prefer to stop right there. Others take it further, suggesting that Theory 2. That Laura, either by shedding the weight of her sorrows or thanks to the machine, can be reborn in a new body, or even Theory 3. Resurrected in her old one. Notice this. In the Appeasement theory, Laura comes back to life inside the cube, inside the memories, but with Rebirth or Resurrection in the little squares instead, in reality, that is. And if we trust the dates in Seasons, these journeys through the cubes and their outcomes take place 9 years after Case 23. Without affecting it in any way, which means no contradictions. which can't be said about the last, fourth theory, timeline bending. It's based on Laura's notes, where she doesn't just write about changing her memories, but about changing the past itself. Well, what do the cubes really do alter reality? What do the little cubes on the diagram can be swapped for squares of reality? And that's where it starts to contradict Case 23. If Laura cancels her death and remains alive, then Case 23 simply wouldn't happen. No body, no case. Of course, one could argue that Case 23 shows events before the changes, and that Laura later just erases them. But Case 23 isn't the end of the story. So is it really interesting to follow events that are knowingly non-canon? Especially since there will be more and more of them, and they will only grow more and more exciting. However, I really can't throw away the evidence just like that. Laura's notes about changing the past, the phrase "the past isn't dead and isn't even past", the photograph with Laura and a corrupted soul, and the cactus that appeared in the case as if straight from the altered memories. Yes, you can doubt all of these, dismiss them as an unreliable narrator or an asset reuse, but their literal interpretation still remains valid. And Case 23 on its own isn't enough to bury this line of thought completely. And I think I know how to resolve this contradiction. Let's agree that timeline bending is just a general case of time travel without going into details. So general, in fact, that we could even remove it from the list altogether. But if we do go into details, there are two principles by which it could work. The first one, which we'll call timeline ripple, and which will take the fourth position in the list instead of bending, corresponds to the classic idea of time travel across a plastic timeline. Notice this. The events of the original timeline fade, meaning they become outdated, because the new timeline replaces them. And I should say, this concept in science fiction is far from perfect, spawning paradoxes out of thin air, which is why there's another one. So, the fifth theory of seasons, timeline branching. The concept is that when you travel back in time, you don't arrive in the same past, but create a different one, which in turn leads to a different future, instead of changing your original one. It creates a new, equal branch of the timeline. So in the diagram, the branches are now equitable, and the original timeline didn't fade. You can still return to your own future, and everything stays exactly as it should have been before your intervention. Or you can move forward into the future of the new timeline and witness all the consequences of your actions. Basically, branching is a universal way to avoid paradoxes, where the alterations made by the time traveler would otherwise erase the very reasons for the time travel, and in extreme cases, even the reasons for the time traveler's own existence. For now, I won't say exactly how this should relate to the series as a whole, or to seasons in particular, and at this stage of our deep dive, we have no evidence. But a timeline running in parallel to Case 23 could explain the reality we observe. And it could give all our favorite characters the happy ending they deserve. In this series, I try to depict the evolution of theories, how it went or could have gone as the games were released. Theories that seem strong can crumble under the weight of new evidence, while the crazy ones may gain strength. And looking far ahead, the timeline branching theory isn't the wildest of them all. It will deserve its place in the sun. And with that, we finally reached the bottom of Case 23. It didn't produce big theories, and thus didn't stir our options much. Personally, I love comparing different views of different games, seeing how they interact. but an ambiguity is priceless too. When things are flimsy, you can shape the facts as you want, and make them fit whatever nonsense we come up with. But solid things that can actually challenge theories, break them, or make them adapt, that's the moving force of progress. They can make our views better. They bring us closer to the truth. Here was Nowhere, diving deep into theories of Case 23. If you disagree with me on anything, or have some theories to add, feel free to leave them in the comments. As always, I would also appreciate you answering some questions that emerged during this episode. This time, I have only one. How did Laura, being dead, appear on the screen in Dale's office to give him a cube? Next time, we'll dive deeply into theories of the mill. And if you want to discuss the lore of Rusty Lake with me personally, make a post on Rusty Lake subreddit or leave a theory on the official Rusty Lake Discord. The links are in the description. I'll be there, and remember, question everything in Rusty Lake.